Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're diving into a psychological phenomenon that is honestly just as terrifying as it is profoundly necessary. We're talking about why that intense feeling of your life completely falling apart, when everything is just shaking at once, why that might actually be the absolute requirement for discovering your true self. Because look, this intense disruption you might be feeling, it's not a punishment. It doesn't mean you somehow ruined your life. Actually, it's the exact space required to separate your essential, authentic self from that carefully constructed mask you've been using just to survive in society.
Which brings us to part 1, the collapse of the persona.
So let's clearly define what's actually falling apart here. It's your persona. For years, you've worn this mask, right? It's this incredibly complex identity built out of family expectations, rigorous cultural standards, and the very specific forms of success society loves to praise. Think of that corporate ladder you completely exhausted yourself climbing, maybe just to make your parents proud. But eventually, life starts asking you these deep, complex questions that your mask simply can't answer anymore. You've just completely outgrown the costume.
Now, society is incredibly quick to diagnose this collapse as a crisis. They'll tell you you're depressed or that your life is just falling off the tracks. But Carl Jung, literally one of history's greatest psychological minds, well, he saw this exact chaos totally differently. He didn't see it as a failure at all, but rather as the soul entering the dark night. He saw it as a vital transformation and really the necessary first step toward your true self.
So let me ask you to just pause and be brutally honest with yourself for a second. How many mornings lately have you woken up, looked around at your job, your relationships, or just your daily routine and felt this bizarre, detached emptiness? Like you're suddenly living out a script written by someone else. If you're feeling that quiet, terrifying pressure, you really need to understand the profound shift happening inside you right now.
And that leads us right into part 2, entering the void.
Because you are now in what Jung called the void. It's this terrifying, totally transitional space defined by profound confusion and just deep self-doubt. The old identity is dissolved, but the new self hasn't fully formed yet, so you're just suspended right there in the middle.
And naturally, we fiercely resist this void. We literally exhaust ourselves clinging to jobs we secretly hate, gripping onto outdated roles, and desperately holding onto our old self-image as the reliable one or the unflappable achiever. But why? Well, because even when that old self is entirely draining the life out of us, it still feels safe.
But eventually, we have to face part 3, confronting the shadow.
See, as we finally let go of that false safety, the light doesn't just magically appear immediately. Instead, your shadow rises. This is a hidden part of your psyche, where you've locked away parts of yourself for years. It holds all those suppressed emotions, that silenced anger you hid so you could always be considered a good person, and the unlived desires and unspoken fears that suddenly just start bleeding right into your conscious mind.
And when this happens, you might feel completely destabilized. You might even be convinced you're actually becoming a worse person. But as Jung taught, when the shadow rises, it's actually a sign that you are moving closer to your true self. You are finally seeing the whole of who you are, completely, without the artificial filter of the persona. And here's the absolute irony of our modern wellness culture. When the tectonic plates of your soul start shifting, society hands you a $40 lavender bath bomb, a daily meditation app, and tells you to just think positive. But listen, you don't need a spa day to survive an existential crisis. You need subtractive growth. You need the raw, uncompromising courage to let false identities die completely and just endure the absolute messiness of real transformation. Because true transformation is not additive. As Jung knew, you can't just pour clean water into a contaminated tank and expect it to stay clean. You literally cannot just layer positive thinking over a crumbling, inauthentic identity and expect lasting peace. Which brings us to a crucial concept in part 4, the art of subtraction. Genuine transformation requires the brutal truth of subtraction. It's the uncompromising willingness to remove what is keeping you small. It's letting go of the habits, the draining relationships, and the outdated self-images that simply no longer serve the person you are actually becoming. And that process leads us into part 5, embracing sacred loneliness. Because to do this subtraction effectively, to really clear out that tank we talked about, you have to endure a very specific and often pretty painful phase of isolation. Jungian psychology calls this space sacred loneliness. Now, this isn't just about being by yourself. It's a profound inner silence. It's this necessary phase where external validation, your carefully curated social roles, and the heavy expectations of your community finally lose their absolute authority over your life. The noise of the world just fades away.
And it's so vital to understand that sacred loneliness isn't just some empty space you should rush to fill with distractions. It's a space you have to actively listen to. In this silence, you have to ask yourself the hard things. What do you truly want? What is lingering in your life merely out of habit? And what are you keeping around solely because you are terrified of change?
When we look at the psychological pipeline we've mapped out in this explainer, it's actually a very clear sequential path. You start with the collapse of the persona, which drops you straight into the terrifying void. But by embracing that sacred loneliness and subtracting the false parts of yourself, you eventually arrive at step 4, your true, authentic self.
So when you're in the thick of it, remember this one thing. You are not lost, and the void is not a sign that something has gone wrong in your life. It is the ultimate proof that something profoundly real is finally happening. Real, lasting transformation doesn't occur in comfortable, well-lit spaces, right? It happens in the dark, transition between who you were and who you are becoming.
Going through this is the ultimate test of your psychological maturity. Acknowledging what is dying in your life is the very first necessary step to allowing yourself to be reborn.
So stop trying to force your life back to the way it was. Stop holding on to the mask. If you have the fierce, uncompromising courage to walk through the dark night of the soul, you will discover the magnificent, irreducible reality of who you truly are. So I'm going to leave you with one final provocative question to think about. What outdated identity, familiar relationship, or totally safe routine is currently collapsing in your life right now that you are absolutely terrified to let go of? Keep moving forward, and I'll see you in the next explainer.